Greta Gerwig's Barbie was the biggest hit of 2022, a billion-dollar blockbuster for 100 reasons, most having less to do with its IP than with Gerwig and Company's masterful execution. It's funny, smart, and uses my favorite literary device, allegory. Except Barbie's allegory has a problem. Acts 2 and 3 forget what Act 1 set up with the Kens, delivering a very good but flawed movie instead of a timeless masterpiece.
This is a man's world. This is a man's world. But it wouldn't be nothing without a woman.
Allegory is an ancient technique, honed in the archaic world, perfected in the ancient world, all but lost in the postmodern world. It's a parable when done for children, and an epic when done for adults. In it, characters represent whole nations or tribes or larger-than-life concepts. A nation or a tribe can represent ideas like iniquity or inequality, and a hero is the solution to one of those problems made manifest, whether it's a rich person growing a conscience, survivalism tempering into altruism, kindness triumphing over cynicism, or a lost truth surfacing as justice in the present. Most allegories use each type as an analog of a real-world concept or side of an argument, and use the narrative or plot to demonstrate the obvious folly or solution to an issue. The best allegories reapportion elements of every side of an argument or a complex subject in such a way that the audience cannot identify with any single position of a fight or debate, and is forced to see themselves in every character. By the end, the audience has empathized with everyone, and any solution or ambiguity the plot resolves is felt as an internal change in the viewer. This kind of allegory is usually only in genre fiction, myth, or philosophical documents. The more alien the world, the less recognizable the identities, the more the entire audience can follow the characters to the objective truth in the finale. In analogy, something often confused with allegory, two things are compared or contrasted, sometimes using substitutes. In an allegory, archetypes represent something much larger than a single person.
It's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in New York?
What? My watch stopped.
I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America.
Representation through analogy or literal inclusion can help specific audience members feel included, but excludes everyone else from relating to that character, thing, or event.
They're fast. They? Not she.
An allegorical representation confuses you, makes you uncomfortable, and leaves you in doubt as to who you are in the scene, putting the entire audience in the shoes of those same audience members that before would just have been included.
You want to perform a transgender operation on a baby? Boris, that is completely unethical.
On my world, it would be unethical not to do so. It is different for my people. On our planet, there are no females.
Was I born female?
To leave you as you were would have been
Unthinkable. Yes. You have taught me that to be female is an aberration of nature.
The first hour of Barbie sets up a powerful allegory for gender, class, and race. In a Jungian dream world called Barbie Land, personifications of the Mattel toys live out the play of girls in the real world. The Barbies run Barbie Land, and the Kens are sidelined and mostly fight for attention. We meet stereotypical Barbie, played by Margot Robbie with the charm and sympathy she brings to all her roles. SB and the other Barbies spend their days in an endless girls' night, a life dictated by how girls tend to play with the toys. Kens are sidelined because young girls naturally make their girl dolls the focus of their play. Combined with the doll's modern brand as a female role model, Barbie Land becomes a world filled with powerful female agents and listless men defined by their roles in a Barbie's life and by leisure activities like surfing. With nothing much else to do, Kens spend all their time vying for the attention of Barbies. This leads to competition and backstabbing that only serves to keep them in their position at the edge of the society. When SB realizes her existential crisis means something is wrong with her little girl, she leaves to find her. Stereotypical Ken, played by Ryan Gosling, tags along on this hero's journey because his identity is formed from her attention. She reluctantly allows it, and after Barbie sends him off by himself, Ken discovers an upside-down world called the patriarchy, where he is treated with the lowest possible bar for respect and acknowledgement, and yet is so intoxicated by it, he travels back to Barbie Land and initiates its execution there, corrupting the town and transforming the naive Barbies into willful servants overnight. When Barbie comes back, she has to put everything back in order, and using what she learned from the unfairness of the real world's treatment of her little girl, now a grown woman, Barbie grants Kens a voice in government, jobs to grant them agency and purpose, and equal rights under the law, creating a messier but overall better world rather than a utopia for the few. Just kidding. They tell them to go figure out who they are, let them have some symbolic seats in government, and the film promises bitterly that they will one day have the same rights a woman gets in the real world. Then Barbie goes to the OBGYN. Inversions of cliches like this feel fresh in the theater, but only truly stick their landings in works where the cliche was an arbitrary plot point on repeat, or was wrong all along and needed a reversal to right the ship. Allegories are made of archetypal characters who represent multiple concepts and perspectives regardless of whether or not the author either intends or knows it. Barbie seems to understand that Kens represent the ultimately toxic movements of Gamergate and men's rights a decade ago that directly contributed to the rise of Donald Trump and the Nazi alt-right. It gets that Barbies represent little girls, women, and the imbalance the patriarchy causes between men and women socially and politically. It doesn't seem to understand that as set up, the inverse has to also be true, that Barbies in Barbie Land represent the patriarchal male world of the late 50s, early 60s, and that Kens are the women of Barbie Land, and thus Ken's awakening is a reenactment of second-wave feminism and civil rights. Let's recap. The Kens are denied agency, jobs, and authority in their own society, are valued only for their entertainment value to the ruling class, their likes and interests are considered frivolous and childish, and their only path to agency is via the attention and potential partnership of a member of the empowered gender. This places them in constant competition with one another and leads to jealousy, backstabbing, and weak friendships, preventing them from helping one another succeed. They are so entrenched in this world they cannot imagine better. Once Ken is exposed to something different, he decides to bring it back home and foment a revolution. This is an amazing allegorical depiction of the world of women entering the workforce in the 1940s during World War II.
Women have shown what they could do in war, and now that the fighting is over, women intend to show the world what they can do in peace.
And demanding their rights by the 60s, the era of Barbie's birth. It forces male viewers whose empathy is blocked by gender identity to see through women's eyes by having it happen to Kens, to relate to female characters as they behave like men, and to judge objectively how exclusionary, unfair, and oppressive it can be to have one gender control everything. On the other side, female viewers have to know at least subconsciously that inverting the polarity of culture in the first half means the Kens are an actual women's social tier, thus making Barbies the men of Barbie Land.
Dream house. It is my dream house. It's mine.
The little dears can get back to their pots and pans.
Instead of following this premise, the second half sees Kens become analogs purely for men's rights, incels, and, somewhat contradictorily, the powerful sexist males of the 1960s. The Barbies cease to be analogs for those men and are now mystically transformed into 50s housewives, as if the patriarchy were smallpox, unavoidable once introduced. Barbie's awakening, however beautiful, is a separate allegory, largely disconnected from the overall meaning of the piece. But allegory does not follow identity. It follows the internal logic of the archetypes as they are introduced to us. By sticking with identity analogs and switching gears, the film unintentionally portrays and thus reinforces the identity logic at the core of every socially dominant bigot. That, given equality, the underclass would use their newfound freedoms to exact a complete inversion of the hierarchy. And the men of Barbie Land, the Barbies, do not choose to make things equitable, but rather set things back to the way they were before with a few small concessions and tell the underclass to go find their own identity, rather than shaping themselves in their shadow. Barbie's self-actualization then resembles that of a young boy in the middle of not getting that Tyler Durden was the villain in Fight Club.
You're not your girlfriend.
You're not how much money you have in the bank.
You're not your house. You're not your mink.
Not the car you drive.
Nope, you're not even Beach.
Not your fucking khakis.
Maybe all the things that you thought made you you aren't
really you.
You were the all-singing, all-dancing crap of the world.
Why do women have to be basketball players, soldiers, workers, politicians? Why vote? Why be judges and lawyers and doctors? White men invented all that. They invented this world. Go invent your own. What should you make this new world out of when all the raw materials are behind me? But that's your problem. Never mind that there's nowhere else to go. Never mind that most of the world was actually made by you to escape the oppressive yoke of my closed eyes.
One lady, she even asked me for the time.
No way.
Way.
You may say, we don't owe men a lesson. We don't owe them half of an allegory in a movie for girls, and it isn't our responsibility to teach them to not suck. Not everything is for you. And those would be valid arguments if my point was to help myself or to help men. But hear me out. It's a little girl who pointed this out to me. Or rather, pointed it out to her mother in front of me. She decoded the world turned upside down allegory of Barbie Land instantly in the theater. The Barbies were the men to her. She didn't relate to their aloofness or social power. They were, however, literal women, so she did relate to stereotypical Barbie's Pinocchio arc anyway. The Kens, meanwhile, resembled her actual position in the real world while being literally men. When Ken has to ask permission to do anything and fight just to be seen, she saw herself. When Barbie tells Ken to figure out who he is without her, the movie seems to think it's telling young men to find an identity unrelated to women. But it felt to her more like a boy telling her to go build her own treehouse. But no one builds little girls' treehouses, and Barbie never acknowledges or understands Ken's worth. She just apologizes for not pitying him more in the first half. In Norway, when paternity leave was introduced for fathers, it was found that the wage gap between men and women shrunk to almost nothing in the country, and men were more voluntarily active in home and childcare. What if the final step of every revolution, if it is to be truly finished, is to tend to the wounded of the enemy? The communists did not have to kill the Tsar's children. They could have raised them. If you do not help the sons of second-wave feminism, you create the next wave of toxic men. If you do not care for the children of the soldiers you've slain, the war just begins again. It has been said by multiple politicians that Washington, D.C. was never more well-behaved than when West Wing was on the air. Prior to The Godfather, Italian mobs were the same as any other street gang. It is only after Michael Corleone's new Roman emperor that they took on the airs of Suits, Codes, and La Familia, and the amount of innocent bystanders dropped dramatically. Allegory is the opposite of realism. Realism is always pessimism in disguise. Just beneath its depiction of reality lay the suggestion that life as it is inescapable and immutable, and to think you can change it is silly, frivolous, naive. In other words, feminine. In an allegory, just enough distance from reality removes identity and thus the barrier to empathy. To see oneself in every side and then experience a solution that relies on that common recognition. Allegories change the world.